الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. السادة الحضور، نرحب بكم في هذا اليوم الجميل أجمل الترحيب. ويسر غرفة الرياض ممثلة في لجنة البيئة أن تستضيف هذه الكوكبة من المسؤولين والمهتمين والخبراء في مجالات الاستثمار والحفاظ على البيئة. السادة الحضور، تسعى لجنة البيئة من خلال عملها إلى نشر وتعزيز ثقافة الوعي البيئي وتشجيع قطاع الأعمال للاستثمار في الفرص الاستثمارية المتعلقة بالأنشطة البيئية والاستدامة في العملية الإنتاجية. السادة الحضور، كلمة لجنة البيئة يلقيها سعادة المهندس إبراهيم بن عبد الرحمن بن الشيخ، عضو مجلس إدارة غرفة الرياض ورئيس لجنة البيئة، فليتفضل.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السادة والسيدات الحضور، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسرني نيابة عن أعضاء لجنة البيئة أن أرحب بكم اليوم في هذه المناسبة الخضراء، فأهلا وسهلا ومرحبا. إن هذا الحضور الكريم وهذه الفعالية المباركة تقدم صورة حية عن الحراك المتصاعد في مجتمع الأعمال لرفع الوعي البيئي ولتحقيق مفاهيم الاستدامة البيئية. كما يسرني أن نرحب بضيوفنا الكرام من مجموعة البنك الدولي الذين شرفونا اليوم مشكورين في غرفة الرياض، ونرجو أن يكون هذا اللقاء خطوة نحو المستقبل الأخضر المستدام الذي نتطلع لرؤيته في بلادنا. لقد دأبت لجنة البيئة في غرفة الرياض على المتابعة الحثيثة لكل مستجدات القضايا البيئية بهدف حصر التحديات والمعوقات التي تواجه قطاع الأعمال في هذا القطاع، واقتراح الحلول لها والمساهمة في صياغة التشريعات التي تحقق الاستدامة البيئية وتوليد الفرص الاستثمارية في توليد الفرص الاستثمارية في القطاع المهم. ونحن في لجنة البيئة نعتز بتعاوننا مع مجموعة البنك الدولي بما يصب في تحقيق هذه الأهداف وتعزيزها من خلال حشد الجهود والخبرات المشتركة. في هذا اللقاء سينطلق الحوار للإشارة إلى آخر التطورات الاقتصادية في دول مجلس التعاون الخليجي بعد الوباء، مع المرور على الآفاق التي يفتحها التنويع الاقتصادي وتقليل الاعتماد على النفط، كما سيسلط الضوء على فرص النمو الأخضر المستدام وعن دور القطاع الخاص في تحقيق هذا المستقبل. أكرر الترحيب بكم أيها السادة الحضور، وأتقدم لكم بجزيل الشكر والامتنان الكبير على تفضلكم بتخصيص وقتكم الكريم وهذا اللقاء وإثراءه بآرائكم وخبراتكم. والآن أترككم مع الأستاذ عاصم أبو سليمان مدير البنك الدولي لدول مجلس التعاون الخليجي ليستهل معكم أولى فقرات الفعالية والكلمة الترحيبية من قبل.
Good morning, Sabah al-Khair, everyone. I'm going to turn to English because the presentation are in English and we have some people actually probably on the WebEx already following us. So welcome everybody, and really we are happy to collaborate for the first time with the Riyadh Chamber of Commerce for this event. I would like to thank the Chamber first, and I would like to thank Engineer Ibrahim Al-Sheikh from the Chamber who will be joining us for this conversation. So thank you all for joining us for this launch of the Gulf Economic Update. As you might know, this report is published twice a year. It provides an update on key economic developments and challenges facing the GCC. This version also includes a special focus section that is timely ahead of COP27 in Egypt that's happening in a few days, and COP28 in the UAE that will take place next year. This special edition will focus on the green growth opportunity and type of strategy that the GCC can benefit from. I will take a few minutes to give you some highlights of this update. My colleagues Ismail and Khalid will go through more details in their presentations. I will start by saying the obvious. on the economic side that the GCC is expected to show strong performance this year. The outlook for the GCC is positive, driven by the robust performance of oil and non-oil sectors. Compared with the other regions of the world, the GCC region is one of the very few bright spots globally on the economic front. It is projected to expand by 6.9% in 2002 before moderating the growth to 3.7% in 2023. This has fully closed the performance gap with other high-income countries left by the pandemic, and the GCC is now poised to outperform other parts of the world. Inflation is also relatively muted in the GCC compared to other high-income countries. The booming hydrocarbon prices have eased pressure on the fiscal balances and public sector debt and has increased current account surpluses in the GCC, all positive for all 6 countries. External balances surpluses are expected to surge to 17.2% of GDP in 2022 before moderating to 13% in the medium term. Now, despite what we have seen in effort by all GCC countries to diversify their economy, the challenge remains. There is progress in the non-oil economy, but limited success in non-oil exports. Reforms must be continued to help nurture a competitive private sector that would help further diversify the economy, especially on the export-led sectors. So, what we see today, and we are highlighting in this focus section of the Gulf Economic Update that will be presented, there is an excellent and timely opportunity to further diversify the economy using a green growth strategy. The extra windfall from higher oil prices to the GCC that is coming in this year and probably in the next couple of years can be used to start a new high-growth green industries that would help the economies of the region grow by an extra 3 to 6%, as will be detailed in the focus section of this update. Let me give you an idea of this potential. This year, the GDP, the gross domestic product of the 6th country of the GCC, is expected to be close to $2 trillion. If the GCC continued business as usual with an average growth of 4%, that has been the historical growth for the last 20 years almost, their combined GDP would grow to an expected $6 trillion by 2050. However, implementing a green growth strategy could see the GCC GDP grow to over $13 trillion by 2050. That's an extra $7 trillion at least by going into those green growth areas. So the green growth section emphasizes that there is no inherent long-run trade-off between emissions reduction, economic growth, and poverty alleviation. Moving away from fossil fuel towards a greener future should not be seen as a threat to the GCC economy, but as a tremendous opportunity, as the cost of renewable energy has fallen dramatically in recent years. Finally, this report highlights potential pathway for GCC countries to benefit from and play a leading role in the global transition to a low-carbon economy, using the transition as a major pathway to further diversify their economies in the high-growth sectors needed for this transition. And those will be on the upstream, downstream, and the production industry of energy. According to the IEA, the energy transition would need $27 trillion by 2050. And when we add the rest of the decarbonization agenda, this figure can be close to $100 trillion. The GCC, we believe, is well positioned to have a good share of this to continue the diversification drive and increase the non-oil export. Let me give you a quick highlight on the Saudi Arabia economy. It is definitely, as I said in the beginning, like the rest of the GCC, on an accelerated growth path in 2022. It's mainly driven by the high prices of hydrocarbon, but it has also been supported by high vaccination rate and swift COVID-19 response policy. Saudi Arabia continues to recover strongly from the pandemic-induced recession during the first half of 2023. The latest official data suggests that the economy grew by 11% during the first half of 2022, the fastest growth since 2011. I will leave a lot of the details on the forecast for my colleagues to go through that. I hope you will enjoy the presentation and the conversation, and I will pass now to my colleague, our senior economist, Khalid, who will join us and do the presentation on the economic side.
صباح الخير جميعا وشكرا للاستضافة مرة أخرى. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a pleasure in standing before you today to provide you with the key messages from our recent Gulf Economic Update report. As Ismail just mentioned, I'm just going to go through quickly on the skeleton and structure of this report. So the report is a semi-annual report that we produce, the World Bank produces every 6 months, and the purpose of it is to highlight the key challenges and to initiate and stimulate the discussions among policymakers in the GCC countries. The report is divided into 3 main sections. The first section covers the recent economic developments and short-term prospects. The second section covers the economic forecasts and risks associated with these forecasts. Finally, each edition of the Gulf Economic Update has a special focus section that we pick a topic that is pertinent to the GCC countries, again to start a dialogue and the discussion around a hot topic in the GCC. And in this edition, we decided to cover the green growth opportunities in the GCC countries. So the first section, which covers the recent economic developments. During 2021 and the first half of 2020, the GCC economies were characterized by robust economic rebound from the pandemic. The new variants were reduced, and the spikes of new variants were controlled, and high vaccination among the 6 GCC countries allowed authorities in the GCC to loosen up their restrictions on mobility and social interactions, as you can see in the graph on the right. This has led the non-oil sectors to be the main driver of growth in 2021, as shown on the figure on the left. And the GDP in 2021 grew by around 2.9% after contracting around 5% in 2020. As you know, the war in Ukraine and the supply chain disruptions that started in the first half during the first quarter of 2022 pushed oil price and commodity prices higher, and especially energy prices, which actually made the oil sector being the main driver of economic growth during the first half of 2022. And we've seen a big rebound in the oil sectors in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, and in UAE. In Saudi Arabia, it was around 22%, and around 15% or 14% in Kuwait and UAE. As the recovery gained momentum during 2021, so did the prices or inflation rates started picking up. Inflation rate reached around 2% in 2.1% in 2021 after a period of very low inflation and actually deflation during the period right during the COVID and 1 year before that. As I said, the war in Ukraine, or I mentioned earlier that the war in Ukraine pushed international prices and commodity prices higher, especially in food and energy, which also added to this increase in the in inflation rates. And so we've seen a spike even further in the inflation rate in 2022 in the GCC countries. However, despite this increase, the inflation rate overall in the region is still muted compared to other regions when compared to high-income countries, for instance. That's the graph on the right. And the main reason for this muted inflation in the report, we attribute it to three main factors. Basically, the first main factor is that the GCC countries have a pegged exchange rate to the US dollar, and most of them do. And so, the second reason, so as the Federal Reserve System of the United States started increasing interest rates to combat inflation in the US, so that the central banks in the GCC countries had to raise interest rates, also controlling the higher inflation rates seen. Lastly, and last but not least, is that there are existing subsidies that are in place in the GCC countries and policy interventions have actually helped to reduce the pass-through of import prices into the local markets and shield consumers and businesses in the region. So these are the three main factors for that muted inflation. Moving on, so higher energy prices have helped to narrow the deficit in 2021. We've seen the deficit dropping from around 11% of GDP in the region in 2020 to close to 2.9% in 2021. And actually UAE and Qatar even actually registering small surpluses during 2021. As energy prices increased higher in the first half of 2022, we started seeing more surpluses were more evident. Saudi Arabia, for instance, registered 6.8% of GDP fiscal surplus during the first half of 2022. Similarly, current account or external balances also strengthened during that time, or during 2021. And the current account surplus reached 8% of GDP in 2021, exceeding even pre-pandemic levels. In the report, we monitor, as some said, we monitor closely diversification efforts by looking at what are the structural reforms implemented in the GCC countries. To name a few, Saudi Arabia continued to improve investment environment. Saudi Arabia ratified the new tourism law and established the Investment Promotion Authority. UAE advanced the digital economy, green growth and business environment agendas, also approving the digital economy strategy, and accelerating the shift to circular economy, while Dubai established the debt management office. Qatar enhanced the contract enforcement and investment promotion, by establishing the investment and trade court to oversee the legal disputes and many others. So I'm not going to go through the lists in the report. Moving on to the outlook and risks. And just like any other region around the world, the GCC region is affected, and we need to understand the world economy develops, the global developments, and outlook to better build our outlook for the GCC region. So, starting with the global economy, the global economy faced a series of destabilizing shocks in the recent past. Whether the war in Ukraine or supply chain disruptions or China's lockdowns and zero policy, COVID zero policy, have all dealt a blow to the global recovery. And so the World Bank has revised its outlook for the global economy downwards from 4.1% to 2.9% in our latest forecast for global growth. In the medium term for 2023, the global economy is expected to hover around 3%. The MENA region, as Hassan just mentioned, the MENA region is is giving a positive picture. And our forecast for the MENA region is 5.5% growth for this year. Now, of course, there is huge divergence between oil exporters and oil importers in the MENA region, with the oil exporters growing at a much higher rate compared to the oil importers in the MENA region. On the energy outlook, our recent commodity market outlook, which was just published last week actually, the forecast is that energy prices, oil prices are going to hover around the $100 in 2022 before moderating to $92 a barrel and $80 in 2023 and 2024 respectively. As a result of this higher energy prices and these assumptions, or based on these assumptions, we're saying, or our forecast is that the GCC region is going to grow by 6.9% in 2022, before moderating to 3.7% and 2.4% in 23-24 respectively. This strong performance is driven by the oil sector, which is going to grow by 11.5% in 2022, before and moderate to around 3.3% in the medium term. On the other hand, the non-oil sectors will continue their recovery trajectory also, but grow at a lower rate. It's expected that it's going to grow by 4.3% in 2022 and 2.9% in the medium term. With the higher energy prices that we expect in this year and in the coming 2 years, the fiscal balance and the external balance, the current account balance, are going to strengthen. On the fiscal side, the higher oil receipts, fiscal consolidation, and the recovery in the non-oil economy is going to push the fiscal surplus to around 5.3% of GDP this year, before moderating to around 3% in the medium term for 2023 and 2024. On the other hand, on the current account side, external balance, we expect that the current account surplus to reach around 17.2% this year, and moderate to around 13% in the medium term. Of course, the current account will benefit from the oil receipts, but also the services sector, and especially the tourism and travel sector, is also witnessing major recovery this year. That is also going to add on the momentum that was built in 2021, on the second half of 2021, going forward in this year and the next. Inflation, regarding inflation, we expect that the inflation rate is going to reach around 3.3% this year. It's going to get higher, but continue to be muted compared to other regions for the reasons I just described. And then the central banks of the GCC will continue to follow the Federal Reserve System. That's one of the assumptions in raising interest rates, which will moderate the inflation rate to around 2.5% in the coming 2 years. Finally, each outlook would always have a risk, and that's what we do in the report extensively. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but maybe highlight some of the major downside risks actually to our outlook. a prolonged war in Ukraine will or could cause or intensify policy uncertainty and raise the supply costs for the global economy. Weaker than expected economic outlook would further raise uncertainty, especially in the oil markets and OPEC plus production plans. Of course, higher interest rates could, with higher interest rates follow tighter global financial conditions will dampen the recovery and will raise debt burdens. This is especially the case for a highly indebted GCC countries like Bahrain, where debt to GDP reaches around 120% of GDP. This is important, for example. And further COVID outbreaks still a risk. COVID-19 and the pandemic is not over yet. Any new variants that are maybe vaccine resistant or highly lethal, for instance, would actually take us back to square zero if not addressed. So these are main risks that the report talks about. I will stop here and maybe ask my colleague Ismail to continue the presentation on the green growth opportunities in the GCC. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to you. And thank you very much to our friends at the Riyadh Chamber of Commerce for hosting us. It's wonderful to be in such a fantastic auditorium. My name is Ismail Rahwan. I'm the lead economist for the GCC at the World Bank. And as an economist, it's super exciting to be in Saudi Arabia. This is the world's fastest growing economy in 2022. So congratulations to all of you on your efforts. I have to mention, I've just come back from what I think is the world's greatest tourism destination. I see my colleagues from UNWTO in the audience. I've just come back from Al Ola, which I think is absolutely superb. So, and I know that you're making lots of efforts on the tourism side. So that's a little bit from me. And today, in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to be speaking about green growth opportunities for the GCC, but especially for Saudi Arabia. So we all know that we are facing a tremendous crisis in terms of global warming and climate change. We see it every day. It's not something that's coming in the future. It's already here. Every day we hear reports of new floods, droughts, all sorts of environmental catastrophes. And they come more frequently and with greater intensity. But the debate has always been, well, it's expensive to move towards low-carbon economy, and so we continue with fossil fuels. But I'm here today to tell you that the message, there is no trade-off between low-carbon economy, greener economy, and faster-growing economy. In fact, they both go in the same direction. And this is some of the numbers I'm going to show you. Hope to give you some ideas of that. So this is a chart that's a little bit technical, but in the past, we haven't had much factor productivity in Saudi Arabia. All of the growth has come from capital and labor. And in fact, productivity has been negative. And what we show in our analysis is that even a modest investment in renewable technologies and an improvement in productivity by 1% would allow your economies to grow between 7 and 10% annually. So this is my next slide. On the right-hand side, you can see the world is investing around $1 trillion every year in renewable technologies. If we are going to meet the Paris Agreement to limit global warming by 1.5 degrees, we are going to have to invest between $4 and $6 trillion a year to 2050. And where is that money going to come from? Most of it is going to come from the private sector. So that's where all of you will play an important role in investing for the future. The government's role is obviously to provide incentives, to provide a regulatory framework to allow investors to move into these areas. On the left-hand side, you can see the breakdown of that $1 trillion. And you can see that we are focusing on more or less three big areas. The first area is energy efficiency, and that's where we will retrofit buildings, real estate, to be better insulated. The other two big areas are renewable energies, which I'm going to talk about, mostly solar and wind, and also the transport sector. So those are the things I'm going to talk about. Now this slide is the key slide to understand what has changed recently. So on this slide, on the left-hand side, you can see the prices of renewable energy, how much they've come down just in the last 10 years. If you see the green band, that green band is basically fossil fuel electricity generation. And it's a band because it depends on whether you're using oil and gas or coal, and there was a wide band there. But usually, they were much cheaper than renewable energy. But in the last 10 years, costs of renewable energy have come down dramatically, much, much faster than even the most optimistic observers ever thought would happen. And now you can see the solar energy is much, much cheaper than even the cheapest coal-fired plants. The three record-breaking solar plants in the world are all in the GCC. The cheapest is in Saudi Arabia, 30% cheaper than the cheapest coal plants. And also Qatar and UAE, the record-breaking solar plants. So, in addition to this, people said one of the challenges to renewables was what they call intermittency. The sun doesn't shine at night, so what are we going to do? And here, the battery technology is also becoming much, much cheaper. In the last 10 years, it's come down 85%, and it's increasing every day, capabilities and storage capabilities and the efficiency of batteries. And that will soon mean that we won't even have to have baseload thermal generation. We could rely totally on renewable energy. Thank you. Sorry about that. Hope you didn't take the first part of the presentation. So these are the ambitions from GCC, and here you can see that Saudi Arabia is the leader in terms of ambition. You have a target to reach 50% renewable energy by 2030. 2030 is not that far away. It's a little bit over 7 years away, and we're going to have 50% of your energy produced by renewable sources. And you can see that really no other country comes close. You can see even UAE has that target for 2050 or less. And you can see a lot of other countries underneath where Saudi Arabia is in terms of energy efficiency and renewable energy usage. So once again, congratulations on leading the way, and I hope that the other GCC countries will follow your example. So here we have a look at the renewable energy currently, and you can see that the solar energy in solar, UAE is leading the GCC in terms of solar energy production. And you can also see that Oman is leading in wind energy. But wind energy is much, much, much less than solar energy. They look the same on this graph, but if you look carefully at the numbers in the bottom, you'll see wind energy is a small fraction of solar energy. And we have the capacity to make the world's cheapest solar energy. It's obvious, right? It's hot and sunny all the time. All of that energy is hitting the kingdom. They say that in 1 minute, the amount of solar energy that the world receives from the sun is enough to power the whole world for the whole year. So that gives you an idea of how much free energy and natural resources are out there to be captured by new technologies. So this graph is about clean hydrogen. So we can make all the electricity we want renewable, and using battery technologies, we can move to electric vehicles, but there are many, many things that we cannot do, at least with the technology that we have right now, in terms of, for instance, long-haul flights. Batteries are very, very heavy, and to power planes for 12, 16 hours, is currently not feasible. We also think that electric trains are unlikely in many areas. This is where hydrogen comes in. Hydrogen-powered trains, hydrogen-powered planes, they are a reality right now, and the technology is developing more and more. So we see clean hydrogen as transition fuel. We will need it for the next few decades until the technology develops, so to the extent that we won't need it anymore. Now, clean hydrogen, I'm not an engineer by any means, but I go back to my high school chemistry classes. It's made from water, H2O. You take away the O, you're left with H2. That's hydrogen. If you do that, that takes energy. If you do that with renewable energy, solar energy, we call that green hydrogen. Other way to make it, which is done now in Saudi Arabia, is to use fossil fuel, to use oil, and then capture the emissions from that process, so that it turns out to be emission-free hydrogen. And we call that blue. And Saudi Arabia was the first country, production plant in Japan, was the first country to transport hydrogen to Japan. So this is also the benefit of having hydrogen. It's a fuel that can be transported much easier. Of course, electricity cannot be transported easily over long distances. You lose a lot of technical losses as you transmit across the world. This graph shows the countries with the cheapest hydrogen production possibility, and you can see the bright red on the Gulf, and that shows how cheap you can produce green hydrogen. And you have announced this big $5 billion plant in Lyon to produce green hydrogen, which should come on stream in 2025, so that's not so far away. And UAE will also establish green hydrogen, and Oman in the Sahara. So this is the way the region is going. Once you have produced lots of green hydrogen, the next question is, so what can we do with it? Think about the supply chains that you can use in terms of the trains, the technology, even the base loads for your electricity generation. So these are the things that we're trying to think about, and we've got plenty of ideas in the report for those who are interested. The last sector I want to talk about is the transport sector. This is really, really important. I'm sure all of you, like myself, arrived by car today. Right? Nobody took public transport, so we didn't have public transport. We waited for the metro, of course, to start. So this is the issue. Transport in the kingdom takes up 32% of final energy and produces 25% of emissions. If we can fix the transport sector, we really go a long way to fixing the problems that go forward. Now, electric car sales. This is growing at an exponential rate. So last year alone, the number of electric car vehicle sales more than doubled in 1 year. And we will move from current 7 million electric vehicles in the world to 150 million electric vehicles by 2050. So of course, Saudi Arabia has already understood this. The sovereign wealth fund has invested in Tesla. But more importantly, we have bought a majority stake in Lucid, 62% stake in Lucid, the Californian electric vehicle manufacturer. I was lucky enough to talk to the CEO of Lucid 2 weeks ago in Jeddah, and he told me that his batteries are better than those of Tesla. Of course, he would say that. But he really is very optimistic about plans. They're opening a production facility in King Hamdallah, Economic City, and they will be producing 150,000 electric vehicles. Now, that is fantastic news, right? But for me, I drive my car around Saudi. I have a diesel car. I'm paying half a rial a week. I'm filling my car for about 30 Saudi riyals. When my car was in Europe, I went back to Europe now. I bought it originally in Europe. I would be paying something like 600 to 700 to fill a car. So if I was in Europe, I would think very, very carefully about buying an electric vehicle. Here, I'm very happy with it. Until we can manage to fix the prices of fossil provide more incentives for people to transfer to electric vehicles, and we can still have this challenge. So this is again something that authorities are thinking about. I think we can do much more and much quicker if we get the incentive right. The role of the public sector is also to build out the charging infrastructure. So I drove from Jeddah to Alola, 7-hour trip. No electric vehicle can manage that kind of range right now. So we need places to charge, we need to build out the charging infrastructure, and we need to provide incentives. And that's the role of the government again. And I hope that those things we will make progress on many of those issues in the coming weeks. The last part of the presentation is, okay, so we're going to move to this area. Now, what are the skills we need to have to make this a reality? And we know that there will be huge demand for green skills, so-called green skills in the future. Some of these skills will come from changing roles that already exist. So if you're an architect, in the future, you're going to be a green architect. You can look at sustainability of buildings, net zero buildings. You can look at passive solar and all of those kinds of things. But there are also jobs that don't exist right now that we will need. Things like wind turbine engineer, solar power engineer, and engineers and scientists and innovators of all types to create this economy and sustain it going forward. A lot of research and development will go into this area. And I'm hoping that Saudi Arabia will be among the leading countries in this area as well. So you can see here is a little bit of a snapshot of where the skills will be required. You can see that most of them will be required in solar. So PV and CSP, they're both solar. Solar. And you can see some skills will be required in wind industry. So not so much in the GCC, but in the rest of the world, wind energy is projected to produce about 25% of future energy needs by 2050. There are other energies, of course, we don't talk about nuclear energy. We talk a little bit about waste to energy, but we know that in the GCC we don't have a big agricultural sector, so we don't really go into the bio side so much, but we do provide a quick overview in the report. So these are some of the green skills required. I talked a little bit about them: sustainability manager, ecologists, compliance managers, all of those environmental health and safety issues. These are the skills that will be required. You can go in detail in the report. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go in detail this morning. So, small recap. I hope you're as excited as I am about the potential future in renewable energy. If we can produce 50% of renewable energy by 2030, that would be an amazing accomplishment. And it would tremendously save on all the fossil fuels that we're burning right now. We could export it, do all sorts of things with it. It will bring growth and increase revenues for the government. So it's a win-win-win. There is no trade-off between moving to a greener economy and maintaining your lead as the world's fastest growing economy. I talked a little bit about hydrogen. Green hydrogen is a transition fuel. Sustainable transport, I think, is absolutely one of the big keys in Saudi Arabia. I hope that we will have the right incentives that for everybody in this room, the next car will be an electric car. So, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Great pleasure to be with you, and happy to answer any questions.
Any question from the audience?
Thank you very much. Very nice speech. Just a question to Dr. Ismail. I'm just quoting here, around 18 studies just reached one conclusion, that hydrogen will be very expensive for heating the building. And this is from McKinsey, from others. I don't think so. The renewable energy all are will be very cheaper. Because I wish you focus to the challenges from the economical side of point of view and the technology, even the battery, the storage is still an issue. Can you please highlight this issue? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. So you're quite right in terms of the challenges. There are plenty of challenges to the move to renewable energies. And you're quite right in terms of hydrogen. So hydrogen still remains a relatively expensive source of fuel, but these costs also are coming down dramatically, just the way renewable energy costs are coming down. So our forecasts show that by 2030, clean hydrogen will be cheaper than fossil fuels. So currently, right now, it's a little bit more expensive, and blue hydrogen is about 1.5 times more expensive than green hydrogen. And yet there is demand for it. As you can see, the Japanese are buying these things. So rich countries have nationally determined contributions to reduce their emissions. And in the future, a lot of OECD countries are introducing carbon pricing. And that will change the incentives in terms of the relative attractiveness of hydrogen and renewables to fossil fuels. You're quite right also to point out the constraints in terms of renewables. So I talked about some of them myself. The battery technology is still developing, and we're probably still 5 to 10 years out from the time where every home will have a battery and be able to generate their own electricity, store and sell back to the grid. But I can tell you, we recently went to Dubai, where we saw the sustainable city in Dubai. And this is a compound of about 500 villas, and they produce 50% of their energy from renewable energy just by putting solar panels on all of the roofs and solar panels on every car park space. So this is a very small kind of pilot project, but it shows what can be done without any incentives from the government. They do have a generous buyback to the grid in UAE. So if you produce solar energy, you can sell it at an attractive price back to the grid. Now these are the kind of things that we need to have in the rest of the GCC to make this transition happen. So I think every constraint can be overcome if we sit down and think about it and we analyze it. Certainly the potential is there. That's the main message that I wanted to convey today. Thank you.
Let me add one more thing on this, and just to highlight that the Saudi Green Initiative is one of probably the most initiative that we have seen actually in the whole region here, and probably in its ambition, but also the way that they're looking. And it's not coming from anywhere else, in my opinion, except economics. Let me just give you a quick follow-up of what Ismail has mentioned. This country basically uses between 500,000 to 800,000 barrels of oil per day to produce just okay. Under the Saudi Green Initiative, by 2030, 50% of your electricity should be coming from solar energy and wind power. The other existing will be transformed into gas. Gas has been actually, in COP26, has been declared as a transition also source of energy. If you're able just to do that, imagine you'll be able to save 500 to 800,000 barrels per day that can be exported today, while reducing the cost of producing your energy. Today, basically, you have here in Saudi Arabia the cheapest source of energy, electricity, is solar. It's at almost 1 cent per kilowatt. Anywhere, not even close to what the fossil fuel energy production is in terms of cost, which is probably 5 to 6 times more from there. So you have basically not only the incentive of like moving into that, but a huge industry, and a lot of jobs and so on. You have actually a financial, a fiscal, and balance of payment incentive to move into that. And that's only we're talking about the generation of electricity. When Ismail talked about the opportunity of the green growth potential for Saudi Arabia and the GCC, it's not only about producing the electricity, and it's about the upstream. You know, I mentioned that just the energy transition is $27 trillion market between now and 2050. That includes actually the production of solar panels, the batteries, the accessories, the turbine, all the cabling and so on, and the maintenance and so on that is needed. Imagine basically if Saudi Arabia invests in producing that upstream part of the energy transition. These are like the potential that we are like looking at, not only here, but around the world. There are already countries that have adjusted their policy to be able to incentivize basically a high growth industrial sector that's all moving towards basically producing upstream what is needed to produce that energy, and downstream of the product, like what we see here with Lucid. Electric car is like a downstream product using electricity. And the mid, which is basically producing your electricity at a much cheaper rate and saving basically the fossil fuel either for exporting it until the transition around the world probably move faster, or towards petrochemicals that might have also a higher value in terms of petrochemicals. The idea here, and you're right, is that some of these have a lot of challenges and a lot of policies still to be taken care of. So the private sector can really have enough ecosystem to be able to invest in these industries, but also to generate the jobs and so on. What's good of our region in MENA, it's a young region. It has a lot of potential with this young people. And 75% of our region is less than 35 years old. It's easier basically to reskill those who have gone to university or get the human capital that has been mentioned to be able to move into these industries and benefit from this transition. The transition is happening. In my opinion, the sooner the GCC move into these type of industries, the better it is from a fiscal and balance of payment perspective, but also in creating a high growth industry that will develop into jobs for the young people of Saudi Arabia, of the GCC and the MENA. The other part of the world, the old industrial part is actually getting older. So while in the MENA region, the bulge of youth could be seen as a challenge, it's also an opportunity to move this youth into these industries of the future. And this is one of them, but we have the digital and others. But we're talking a little bit here about the green growth opportunity. Sorry.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have seen the price of renewable energy in the graph you presented. Does it include the storage cost or separated? This is the first question. Secondly, one of the main challenges in the GCC countries is the food security. So I haven't heard anything about the energy, food, and water nexus. Okay, so this is a big challenge in the GCC countries. So how can you look at the future growth of this in the GCC countries without considering the food security issue? The other question that I was expecting something about the sustainability and the circular economy to replace the linear economy model, which is currently working in this area. So this is my questions. And last thing is that you made a comparison between the diesel price in the GCC countries in Europe, and I wish it's not reflected in your recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I can assure you that no, we don't talk about diesel prices here. We did do an earlier report that looked at fossil fuel subsidies and some of the potential advantages for the kingdom in gradually removing those fossil fuel subsidies and the kind of social safety nets looking after the vulnerable populations. That's not the topic for this report. So when we're looking at green growth, a lot of people confuse green growth with environmental sustainability. They're linked, but they're very, very different. Right? So I think your question about food security is really a question outside of what we're focusing on the green growth today. But it's a legitimate question. It's a question that comes up a lot in the GCC, especially after the pandemic. During the pandemic, people were worried about supply chain issues. They were all of a sudden worried about where the food was coming from. Could it be sustained? Was there going to be a problem in supply chains? What about container traffic, etc., etc.? And now, of course, the war in Ukraine, food prices, and I know that many of your members in the chamber are also in this food and retail space. So I think we'll have a lot more information than I have, number one. But from my personal perspective, what I saw during the pandemic, and this was a once-in-a-lifetime event, there was a wobble, but we didn't have shortages of anything during the pandemic in the GCC. At the time of the pandemic, I was living in Kuwait. The shelves were stacked, 100%. People in Washington were complaining they didn't have toilet paper. But in the GCC, everything was being supplied. So I think we need to maybe let go of the emotional attachment to this idea of food security, because I remember in the debates in Kuwait, people were saying we need to start planting our own food. No, that's not the answer to this particular question. The answer is to look at the trade agreements that you have, maybe to diversify the sources, and continue focusing on the things that you can do the best. I think it would be tremendously detrimental to the GCC countries if they started focusing, for instance, on agriculture and subsidizing water inputs, etc., etc. So those are my views on the food security issues. I come to the last question that you asked about the prices of solar. No, that's just the production of solar energy. We don't include the battery and storage technology. Thank you.
One more addition on the water energy nexus. Actually, we are launching a report with the GCC Secretariat on the water energy nexus. It will talk a little bit about food in the GCC, but not so much. It's more about basically how to use the energy in a much more efficient way, using some of the technology that has already been developed, mainly here in Saudi Arabia, about the technology of desalination, plus using the renewable to reduce actually the cost of the production of water, and also to make it much more efficient and almost without any emission. So this is something that's coming on November 7th with the GCC Secretariat here in Saudi Arabia.
Anyone has questions?
Thank you for this insightful report. First thing is that I have a thought, which is we're always moving forward with the booming industrial world. We have the coal from train, we transport even for that the horses and they said they have a lot of pollution. Then we have to move to cars. Then 100 years later, we have to move to electric cars, and we are still moving on. It's part of human nature. However, even if we invest in this area, it's not a guarantee that it will still be attractive for investors. My question is, this is a thought. My question is, how can we balance, or where is the balance between responsible investment and value for money or consumption, consumer consumption. Because at the end of the day, people, public, they need to find the balance. It must be feasible for them to live naturally, and it won't affect their lifestyle and for each level, so they can work, the system can work overall. So where can we find the balance in that? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. So, quite right. Let me start at the beginning of your question. Right. So, yes, we will be going through technological advances, and I'm sure solar power is the cheapest now. I'm sure we will find cheaper and cheaper sources of energy. Right. So, people talk about cold fusion. They've been talking about that for 50 years. That could be the holy grail of, very zero cost, emission free energy. But we don't know where that will be. But we do know right now that solar is the cheapest and will be in tremendous demand to 2050 because the world has signed on to the Paris Agreement and everybody has agreed, including all the GCC, to move to net zero emissions. So Saudi Arabia has a target by 2060. UAE by 2050. So we know that for the next 30, 40 years, these investments will have a return. There will be demand for renewable energy. We know that. So this is as close a thing as you can find to a sure bet in terms of investment as you can find. Now, I agree with you. There are parts to this question that we are still uncertain because the technologies are still uncertain, right? So there's research and development in the battery technology, in other kind of technologies. We don't know where that will come out, right? And of course, this is where venture capital comes in. This is where risk capital comes in, and this is where I think the role of the public sector also has a role. So the most innovative countries in the world, and we looked at. We worked a little bit with the UK government on this report to understand how they put these things together. So they realized that risky investments may be not attractive to the private sector on their own. So the government moves in and creates a nexus between the public sector, the private sector, and academia. And they have incubators and accelerators where they support the research and development and they support the commercialization. So we've got a few pages on that in the report where we look at what they call the Catapult initiative in the UK to create hydrogen valleys to really push the clean hydrogen economy. So there are ways to tackle that, and agree with your question. There was one point you said at the end. The balance, yes. Yeah. So here again, so this is the debate in the GCC, is how we can move these incentives, because we've relied heavily on subsidized fuels for the last 50 years, which has been a natural development in the GCC. Now we want to remove the subsidies a little bit, make it more expensive, so that then the renewables become more and more attractive. The difficulty, as you say, is what happens to poor people, vulnerable people, and not even poor and vulnerable, but everybody is going to feel that, right? If you're going to increase the fuel price, you're going to double it, or people are going to complain. So UAE has done this. Every time I go to UAE, people complain and they want to roll it back. Every time they tell me this, Look at the neighbors, they are subsidizing, we want to subsidize, we used to pay very little, now we're paying a lot, we don't like it. So the idea is that the subsidies inherently are very, very wasteful, right? So I live in an apartment where you can see the gaps in the windows. The insulation is so poor that the AC is just churning out to keep the place cold. If we had a little bit better insulation, it would be much, much more efficient. But if we're not paying very much for the electricity, we don't really care, right? So again, I don't need to be subsidized, but the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is subsidizing me. Every time I fill up my car, you're subsidizing me. I don't need that subsidy, right? So it's time to remove all of these subsidies gradually, put in place a safety net for the vulnerable populations, and you will be able to give them the same standard of living or higher without using the fossil fuels, which is a very scarce and valuable resource. Let's use it to the best of our ability. So that's how I think the balance has to be made. Thank you.
في أحد عنده أسئلة أخرى؟ Thank you so much. الله يعطيكم العافية. تفضل.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the presentation. I have a quick question in regards to the private sector, which was highlighted during the presentation, and its important role in sustainability and green energy, etc. So I'm just wondering, and curious actually, if the World Bank has any recommendations to governments, whether in the MENA region or elsewhere, in terms of policies that one would incentivize the private sector to implement corporate sustainability, which fundamentally impacts positively their bottom line, and also policies that perhaps hold private sector accountable in terms of moving towards sustainability and clean energy, etc. So just curious if there are any recommendations as such. Thank you.
All right. One of the things that we've looked at in terms of private sector is construction industry. And I spoke a little bit about this when we went to the Dubai Sustainability City. So in a lot of the developed world, in OECD countries, they have very strict sustainability guidelines for construction. The UAE does have guidelines, but they're all voluntary. And they're very, very unambitious. So it's very easy to meet those guidelines. And the importance of the sustainability city in Dubai is that this is a private sector developer. It's not publicly backed at all. And yet they can find it commercially viable to use sustainable building techniques. So they use very lightweight materials. They orient the buildings in a certain way so that the windows are all on the north-facing side. They cover them all in white paint so they're reflective. They can keep the buildings cooler. They put solar panels on all of the roofs. They use very good insulation so that they're very thermically efficient. And what we're trying to persuade governments in the region is to adopt similar standards. Why not have everybody build to these standards? We know it's profitable. Everybody can make a profit. So if it's already profitable, then why not impose these standards on the rest of the industry and have everybody moving in that way? So now the World Bank publishes lots and lots of different reports in lots and lots of different countries. And we're increasingly focused on green growth, climate change, sustainability. I think last year we spent $35 billion in terms of our portfolio in this area. And in all the analysis that we do provide recommendations on corporate sustainability and recommendations for government and the private sector. Let me ask Hassan to add.
Thank you. And, thank you for the question. Look, a couple of things are very important to know is that there are technology already there and actually used in Saudi Arabia. I was talking to Engineer Ibrahim and he can tell you a little bit more about what they're doing with the glasses of just the buildings, and how much basically it's reducing their energy bill. But the most important part in this is that, yes, there is basically the policy is being set by the government. The private sector basically move in and fill in the gap to build or to do businesses that are actually compliant with those policies. Now, the good thing about a lot of what we have talked about is that it has become the cheapest way or the cheapest way either to build or the cheapest way either to maintain, which bring in a better rate of return for the investment for people who are going that way. So while it's not anymore you're imposing and then the overall cost is increasing in a lot of the different industries, including the building industry. So I mentioned earlier about the electricity. I would like actually Engineer Ibrahim to tell you the example of one building that they're involved in, and also about what happened in CAF in King Abdullah Financial District.
طبعا كان حديث بيني وبين الأستاذ عصام بخصوص كيف توليد الفرص للقطاع الخاص، ومن ناحية كيف أن القطاع الخاص واكب هذا الشيء لموائمة البيئة وبنفس الوقت الاعتماد على الطاقة والتقليل على الاعتماد على الطاقة النفطية. توجد أحد المباني طبعا كلها عبارة عن الألمنيوم والزجاج، فتم اقتراح من إحدى المصانع الموجودة اللي نتعامل معها وموجودة عندنا من ناحية الزجاج أن يكون يعني هو دبل كلاس ويكون شريحة خفيفة بسيطة، بس أنها قامت يعني بحفظ الطاقة والاستهلاك أقل في الكهرباء الإلكتريسيتي. من ناحية كان الاستهلاك تكون الفواتير بعدد كيلووات عدد كبير، فقلل إلى ممكن تقريبا نسبة 70%. فالآن الكود العمراني من ناحية الأبراج مثل المركز الملكي عبد الله المالي أصبح المواصفات جدا عالية. حكومتنا الرشيدة الآن تقوم بموائمة المعايير والاشتراطات اللي تساعد على التقليل من استهلاك الطاقة النفطية. هذا بشكل مختصر على خصوص الطاقة والاعتماد. وحنا نشكر مجموعة البنك الدولي على حضورهم اليوم وتحفون الشيء الكثير، ومن ناحية الآفاق على التنويع الاقتصادي وتسليط الضوء على فرص النمو الأخضر المستدام. ودولتنا يعني لديها الكثير من المبادرات، نسأل الله أن يكون القطاع الخاص موائم لهذه الأحداث. ونحتاج من البنك الدولي أن يكون بيننا وبين غرفة الرياض زي العلاقة التشاركية، سواء في عقد توقيع الاتفاقيات لرواد الأعمال سواء في مجال الصناعة في مجال البيئة، أن يكون نوعا ما مساعد المنشآت الصغيرة والمتوسطة لتوليد الفرص لهم. شكرا.
شكرا أخ إبراهيم. I just want to thank really the chamber for you have a question, sorry.
Yes.
World Bank, how he is mentioned in the report regarding the algae production and the sea sources. Also, we have very good source, I mean, of the Red Sea and the Arab Gulf and the Sea of Oman, which can be also used for the biodiesel and also production of the algae.
Yeah, I mean the report doesn't cover everything under the sun that is possible, but definitely this is one that is part actually of the MENA Green Initiative of the Saudi government that was launched by the Crown Prince last year. So we are looking very favorably at there won't be like one source. The thing is that when you look at what percentage of energy will come from different parts, what we see and where the big chunk of investment need to go, and it will create the biggest probably challenge and opportunity at the same time, is really to move into the area of high growth industry that will enable the transition, the energy transition. and not only for the internal consumption, but also for the export. Because this part of the world is relatively stable, has a lot of capital, has a lot of young, educated people, and that can actually bring those industries forward to help move the economic diversification, the economic growth in this country, create the future of jobs that are really get to the level of ambition of its young people. And that's very important. We cannot wait until basically the 2030 or 2040 when the prices are low, because other people are moving into this industry very quickly and the prices are going down. And we know if we start something last year, Lucid is going to start producing in 2026. They started actually building here last year. So it is a 5-6 years investment before you get the production, before you can go out and start exporting and using the technology that you are building in Saudi Arabia. So there is a big potential for this region to build the upstream, what is needed for this energy transition, to create the energy from alternative sources, so this region stay as a hub, power hub in a way for energy around the world, and then export either pure energy or export basically the upstream and downstream products that are needed. And we are working actually with the Arab Fund for Development in this whole region and with certain government to create an electricity market that goes beyond the borders, that the GCC and the rest of MENA can actually export, trade among each other electricity, but also export to other parts of the world like Africa, Europe, and Asia, cheap electricity that comes out of here. So the potential is great. I think in the Saudi Green Initiative, there is a lot of areas that talks about this already. What we feel in Saudi Arabia is probably you are in the ambition and in the plans ahead of a lot of other countries. Now, how to move this? It's like the Vision 2030. We know that it is great where we want to head, but how to move from the vision to strategy to implementation on the ground, so the vision basically can be achieved. And this is basically where a big part of the policy work from the government is needed, which moving into that direction also. Under Vision 2030 here, the government is in transition to move big part of this economy to the private sector. Now, how to do it in the fastest way and the most effective and efficient way possible? That's basically all the reform that we're seeing happening today in Saudi Arabia that will enable what we've been talking about, and hopefully Saudi Arabia and the rest of the GCC moving into this high growth green sectors that will allow basically this extra growth to happen, and the creation of jobs, and also hopefully create a better standard of living for everyone in the GCC and probably around the GCC, because we know the GCC is a host of a lot of expats from all over the world, and especially from the MENA region. Let me stop here to thank really Engineer Ibrahim, the Chamber, for hosting us. It's great to be here, and it's really great to have this discussion. You'll see a few things happening in the press around this. This is not a prescriptive of what needs to be done. It's mainly a beginning of a discussion where this discussion was not here just 4 or 5 years ago. And we are happy to see that, the governments in the GCC are moving into this direction, taking advantage of the energy transition rather than basically laying back and letting things happen around them, which is great to see that there is a leadership from the GCC and in Saudi Arabia in that direction. So thank you all very, very much. It has been great basically to have this conversation, and we hope that we can continue in this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much.